right.
Hang on, it's thinking.
And then Patrick, you'll put a slide up there so we can see. And we should probably look at the camera, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hello, everyone out there in Facebook land. My name is Kent Hall. I'm Blurb Brand Experience Manager, and I'm here with Howie Severson.
Hi.
Professional book designer for how many years?
10 years that I've been freelancing, and I've been working in publishing for 20 years.
Cool. And so we are here to talk about the fundamentals of book design, to kind of like take you through like what you need in a particular book. And we'd love to know your questions too. Due to the nature of this, we probably can't answer like really specific technical questions about how the software works. For that stuff, we have our support team that'll be glad to help. We can answer quick questions about that, but really we kind of like to get into like stuff like things about margins, talk about the different parts of a book, what needs to be there, and kind of some of the creative challenges that you've probably had to overcome over the years. So should we look at a book?
Let's look at the book. Well, which one? Should we do photo book, text book? Does it matter?
Let's start with the photo book.
Okay. All right. Well, let's keep it somewhat simple in terms of photo books. This is a cookbook that's about barbecue.
Awesome.
And, well, let's see. Should we...
I mean, what's the front matter? Like, what should people sort of put into their book that like shows people this is a book? Besides the fact that it has pages and stuff. But.
Okay, so there's kind of a set sort of order of pages that constitutes front matter that pretty much applies across the board. So, of course, you're going to start out with your title page. I move up here if you can see that. And actually, this is, there's your title page and there's your half title page. And oftentimes books will have both. And so the first book, or the first page, often is the half title page, and that would just be your title. And then you turn the page, and then you can get into your full title page, which is going to be, title, subtitle, author, imprint logo for your publishing company, if there is one. And then oftentimes, just so I can show you, it's very attractive. It can be attractive to like design out your title page so that instead of just having, say, text on a white page, that you might have a background image, that you might carry your title page over to the left page, like we did here.
And these are sort of like conventions. I mean, it doesn't have to have this, but this is sort of the way books
exactly. And obviously, if you're just doing like a book of poetry that's just text with no images, then that wouldn't necessarily apply. But I would recommend that it's a good idea to try to design out your title page just to kind of give it an attractive entry point to someone that's opening your book for the first time.
Yeah, because people will. I mean, as they go through your book, they will pick up on these little cues, and that'll sort of like infer a kind of quality like onto the book if it just looks professional.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what do we do after our title page?
So typically the copyright page would come next, and that's almost always, in fact, I would say always on the left page. And copyright page, I'm sure most people know, just consists of all your copyright information. A lot of times it's just boilerplate information. You might have credits if you have, say, images in your book, or the image on your cover, say. You might have credits for those things.
And it's important to note you don't actually need a lawyer to create your copyright page.
Right.
You just put the date, copyright symbol, your name, and the date.
Yeah, and I think I've worked with people that are actually even trying to sell their book, in which case the copyright page may just consist of, copyright, your name, and then, maybe like a paragraph of something below that. So, yeah, it really depends on, obviously this one, this book has a ton of credits, so, there's a lot of fine print here that, your book may not have. Coming after that is the dedication. Usually the dedication follows the copyright page. So the dedication is right here. And again, we chose to design this page out with like a background texture. And the dedication is, the type size is a bit larger than what you'd see as in body text in the interior of the book. So again, it's a bit of a decorative element, and the dedication could be meaningful to you and to whoever you're dedicating the book to. So you could kind of have fun with that page as well. If your book is kind of more of a simple text design, oftentimes just a nice like italic font with some leading, line spacing between lines can be attractive as well.
And actually, since we're talking about fonts, how many typefaces or fonts have you? I don't know which one is the correct one to use. Should we say typefaces or?
Most people, typefaces is correct. Most people say fonts, so we can say fonts.
How many different fonts have you used? Like at this point in the book, so.
Well, at this point, so this book had 3 fonts total.
Okay.
And I think up to this point, we've only used 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you use different weights.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and that's a good point. Is that there may be a temptation to kind of go font crazy with stuff and have a lot of variety. But oftentimes, you can design a book with just one font, but within that font family, you could have italics, you could have small caps, you could have all caps, you could have bold, and you could have condensed versions of that font, you could have extended versions of that font. So I've designed plenty of books that only use one font, especially if they're on the simpler end.
That's good to know because I always feel lazy when I do that,
Mm-hmm.
but apparently I'm actually practicing good book design.
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
All right, so we've dedicated our book.
Okay.
We've given copyright.
So then we get to the contents. Show you there. So this is the contents page. Again, we opted to go with just a decorative texture on the left page, which is nice. And then on the right page, the contents begin. Oftentimes in industry lingo, we call the contents page the TOC for table of contents. And again, we all know what a table of contents page is. Again, kind of in that vein of using fonts within a family, I would say that it's important in a table of contents to have a hierarchy established so that if you have a lot of different sections within your book, for example, this book has part openers, it has chapter titles, you have the front matter here, you have the back matter here, and we have very clear distinctions between each so that the reader can easily just kind of identify, what those sections are.
All right.
Obviously, sometimes contents pages run, many pages depending on the length of the book. You can also make a decision how much you want in your table of contents because some books will list chapter titles and all the sort of subsections within each chapter, and that can lead to a table of contents that's like 8 to 10 pages. This book we just had chapter titles, part titles, and chapter titles. Yeah.
And did you use Roman numerals? Because I know sometimes when I read books, like the first, the introduction stuff is like Roman numeraled, right? And then you get into Arabic numerals.
Yeah.
That's just up to you whether you want.
Kind of, yeah. I've often seen if you have part openers. I don't know if people know what part openers are, but oftentimes you'll have a book that's separated into both parts and chapters. So a part may encompass, say, 5 chapters, and part 2 would encompass 3 chapters, part 3, and so on. So you're just organizing your book in those chunks. And I've seen parts are often Roman numerals, and then your chapter numbers are Arabic numerals.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we've got our contents. Now the book starts, right?
Yeah, you often have other sections within the front matter. So we have an introduction here. And then oftentimes front matter will consist of a preface, a foreword, if you have a guest person writing a foreword for your book. Typically, a foreword comes, I think the foreword and the preface precede the introduction. So the introduction usually is the last section of your front matter.
Gotcha.
Because the introduction is basically, it's introducing everything that's to follow. And so your preface and your foreword is sort of more like preliminary content.
Right. And the foreword is the thing that in a fiction book you don't read first because it will tell you everything that happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Good point. Or oftentimes you see forwards in fiction books, like the book is old and you have a foreword by somebody contemporary that's sort of, reflecting back about the importance of the book and so on. So oftentimes forwards just may be, for a new book, maybe like a guest, somebody that's sort of serving almost as somebody that's endorsing your book in a somewhat indirect way.
And then we're into content, right?
Sure. So we can delve right in here. So this is a part opener. So this basically has the most weight of any element within your book. If your book has parts, I'm not saying it has to. But this is like your super element, sort of. It's your umbrella that's sort of encompassing the chapters that are to come. So it's very simple. It's just a part number, a part title. Sometimes you'll see part openers with like a list of the chapters below it. In this case, we didn't have that.
We have some cool little flourishes down there. You've got
a
knife. And do you draw those, or do you don't have to give up all your secrets. Do you find them out there?
It depends. Both. A lot of the times it kind of depends on the budget. So if there's a budget that allows for original artwork, then you could a publisher could ask an illustrator to hire an illustrator to draw that artwork. Otherwise, there's a lot of stock imagery that's out there. I can't remember what we did with these, but there's a good chance that you could probably find something like this on like iStock or one of the stock photo sites out there. This, I should say, I know I don't want to go off in too many tangents, but on the part opener here we have, I'd call this a display font. You wouldn't see this font as text, as body text,
right? Because
it's like a grungy, we'd call this like a slab serif font, sort of. It's kind of chunky, and it's basically for display purposes only. It's intended to be large. So this font, usually a font like this that's decorative in a way, usually would only appear at large sizes as what we would call display element. That would be like a part title, part number, chapter title, that sort of thing.
But big and chunky and attention grabbing, and
exactly.
And it kind of gives the book like it's like a lot of personality, right?
Yes.
For a book on barbecue.
Exactly. I mean, this, you see these fonts are kind of trendy right now, sort of like grungy, slab serif chunky fonts, and you see this sort of thing for products that usually pertain to men, masculinity. You'll see these for on whiskey bottles and pickup trucks and that sort of thing. Seriously, I mean, it's kind of fun to look around and just see the trends out there. But so barbecue books, I see this a lot.
Yeah, I mean, like it's got that cattle brand.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then you're into the content and.
So another chapter opener here with a photo and another large chapter number / title. And we kind of did this decorative B, the title's Barbecue Basics. So we're just playing off that letter B. It's just a decorative element there. And then chapter number up here. And let's see.
Here, I can hold the book
perfect.
and you can point to stuff.
Yeah, perfect. So now we're into chapter 1, and then we get into the body text. So we have just oftentimes in a chapter we'll have what's called a drop cap. to introduce the first paragraph of text in the chapter, and that's often a letter that descends three lines usually. And then we have a head. This is what we would call one head. So again, we're using that chunky grunge font for that as a display font. And then we have body text.
And then you have your page numbers you chose to do on the bottom, along with the running head, which I guess is not a head in this case.
Or a footer.
Running footer.
Yeah.
And that's just sort of up to what you like, right?
In terms of the
Design.
location.
Yeah.
I would say that in general, it's probably more common these days to see running feet. I'm not saying that's across the board, but
Okay.
but obviously in this case, it's down at the bottom, and when we add that there, or when it could be at the top too, we allot a fairly a nice bit of margin space there for that. Oftentimes when I see books that are kind of amateurly designed, the footer or the header is almost, it's like one line below the body text, and it's almost crashing into it. And I think people have this sort of instinct to almost, they want to fill out the page with stuff. And, I'd say, in my opinion, I think in many designers' opinions, nice margin space is very attractive. You're basically letting your text kind of breathe and exist without distraction. So we have here, I'd say this is maybe like an inch and a quarter, to the last line of text.
And for those of you that are making books in Blurb book, right, and you happen to be wondering where exactly you add those page numbers, there is actually a section called backgrounds. You'll find it at the top left of the book, right? You have pages and you have covers and you have backgrounds. Backgrounds will allow you to place a page number. It'll ask you where you want to start doing page numbers. And then this is also, if you draw any sort of text box in there near your page number, that could then be your running header or running footer. So that's how you would add that. And of course, if you're using InDesign, you probably already know this stuff, but there's a place where in master pages you can add your header and your page numbers. Any questions out there from TV land?
Yes. So I think this will lead nicely into our next one as we get into more content. Jackie asks, I'm working on a photo book documenting a history of a business. There are a lot of black and white photos and a few color ones. How can I do a layout that won't be boring?
Well,
I probably need a little bit more information about the book in terms of, who your audience is and what the business is and so forth. But in general, if it's a photo book, I would make it a book about the photos. In other words, make the photos large, and it sounds like that's going to be the feature of your book. And so in that sense, the design, even though you're going for an exciting design, the design could actually be fairly simple because I'm gathering that the purpose of your book is to showcase these historical photos. I could show a different book here. This, I kind of...
oh, wow.
Maybe slightly regretting bringing this, but this is a book of lithographs of what are called bird's eye views. They're these old maps. I don't know if they call them maps, but yeah, I'm definitely going to need help with this.
Yeah.
But they're these lithographs of cities, American cities from like the mid to late 1800s. And the design is actually quite simple. The objective of the design, people that open this book want to see these beautiful lithographs. So in this case, your text block here is actually very narrow. Even though the book is humongous, your instinct may be to spread type across the page, but the purpose of this book really is about showcasing the artwork. So we're making the artwork as large as possible. The information here is kind of, people may read it, people may not, but it's not it's not the primary point of interest. So this whole book is just all about large artwork. So if that's what your book is kind of geared towards, then that would be priority number one in my mind.
Yeah. And we happened to see your question before we started, and I ran out to the Blurb library and just picked up this book called Up the Bray, and it's about hospital, not a business, but there's some kind of cool, I think, successful things they do in here. They incorporate a lot of not just photos, but kind of ephemera as well. So here you have a plan for the hospital. And, again, it's a lot of black and white, but they use little pops of color here, which is nice. So even the page number down here, has kind of a little treatment to it. And again, you get to these pages where suddenly there's postcards and things. So you're letting the viewer, in terms of excitement, kind of change their focus. Just when they're kind of used to the fact that maybe they're looking at, just these sort of, basic photos, then suddenly you have like this, all this old-timey stuff. So, and they also built into it, if you can see here on the right, a timeline too. So if you want a way to kind of organize things, just kind of having a running timeline that goes down, could be really cool. But I mean, it's the layout is not super complex. It's one column per page, right? And
yeah, but like you said, this timeline, these are nice, visual points of interest that can kind of it not only is visually attractive, but it also kind of brings your viewer's attention to certain parts on the page. And
can you show it?
There we go. So yeah, there's the timeline there, and then again they alternate that then with the photos, and I think there's just a really nice visual rhythm, to this book. And again, you have the use of a map kind of as the background. And it just sort of keeps people from getting bored. And I think that's what happens when we look at books. We expect to know what's coming next, and just sort of our eyes can kind of glaze over. So,
mixing up layouts is a good way of maintaining interest throughout the book. Although I would say that as you're mixing stuff up, you're operating within a certain parameters. So your margins, say, would be consistent throughout. Your heading structure and that sort of thing is consistent throughout. So you have kind of a infrastructure you're working within. I think some people, they tend to maybe want to go a little bit crazy with their layouts, and then it kind of ends up just being stuff thrown on the page. But I always, like when I'm setting up my page templates, I actually spend a lot of time just with that part first, just like the infrastructure, the grid, just determining your few elements that are going to kind of be consistently repeating throughout. And then once you have that, then you can start kind of playing with variations on those themes.
Yeah, and if you're using Bookright or Booksmart, you'll be aware that we actually have a number of templates that you can use. And both programs allow you to create your own templates. In Bookright, it's really easy. You can just draw a text box of any size. We give you the bleed lines and show you where not to put content so that it might be lost. I mean, I think it's kind of plain, right? Like you kind of get to play around a bit, which I think is always exciting. Let's see. I don't know if I have any other kind of business books here to show. Back to our barbecue book or something else. I mean, when you're into the content, margins are important, right? Because that's about readability. That's about making sure the page is comfortable.
Yeah. I would say that let's just look at a basic text page here. There's certain terms. I don't know if you want to go into too much of this detail, but one term you should probably know is that this margin here on the inside of your page is called a gutter margin. And one mistake I see a lot of people make is they start by simply placing their text block centered on the page. But what happens is that a lot of your page actually disappears into your gutter during the binding process. And so you're looking at perhaps, say, an 1/8 inch of page that just simply disappears. It just really no longer is visible. So, I mean, this isn't a hard and fast rule, but as a general rule, I would probably think about building more space in for your gutter. So let's just say that we're looking at a 6x9 book. Your gutter margin may be, say, 0.875 inches, whereas your outside margin would be 3/4 of an inch. So you have an extra 1/8 inch into your gutter. That will actually make the text block appear more centered on the page.
And if you're using any of the Blurb tools, including the InDesign plugin, we will actually show you the trim lines. Even if you're not creating your book with the trim and the gutter and different bleed lines on all the time, at least when you're establishing your layout, you want to center them really based on those little purple areas where we show you not to put the text, because it takes into account that gutter margin that you're talking about. So don't center it on the page, center it within the actual bleed and trim lines that we provide for you.
Right. Yeah, and then going on with margins again, I would don't be afraid to have some nice airy margins. This outside margin I think is probably is about 1 inch, and because essentially when you're cutting out your margin space, you're not only prohibiting the text to breathe well, but you're also making the width of your text block too wide. And there's a certain point where readers actually have eye fatigue if your text block becomes too wide. And that point, I mean, there's not like there's a set rule on that, but it's probably around 5 inches wide is where I draw the line in terms of making the width of my text block. So for a book this size, I think this is about 5 inches. And if we're looking at 6x9, so that'd be a narrower trim size, we're probably looking at like 4.5 inches wide.
So these lines seem to be ragged, right?
They are.
What's your feeling on, sometimes you see we're talking about ragged, this is where your lines are not justified, so they don't, if you were to draw lines down the page with justified, text goes from like one end to the other.
Right.
This is ragged, it just sort of breaks based on word length. What are there certain kinds of books for which you want to do one or the other, or is it?
Most body text is justified. Usually when you see a text block like this, it's justified text. And I think the reason why we went with a ragged line on this book was because it's a casual book, and justified generally leads to a more sort of formal look to your book.
Yeah. Compared to this is an art catalog that someone did, and so you really kind of want like more of that kind of sort of formality to it, right?
Exactly. But with justified text, there's actually a point where in almost every book where you can kind of go over the top with formality. For example, if your book has, say, numbered lists or bulleted lists or extracts, usually you're going to see those set with rags because you get just this this formality that just kind of almost becomes overpowering when everything is just perfectly aligned on each other. So even in like a professional book or a novel or that sort of thing, you'll usually see justified body text, but then those elements that appear within, say, an extract would have a rag to it.
Gotcha. So what comes towards the end of the book? Like, got all this content in the middle. What do we put at the end?
Well, so the end we call it back matter, or some people call it end matter, and it could be lots of things, but often you'll see appendices or appendixes, and we'll see references if your book has a lot of references to outside sources. Obviously, the index.
Is that where you put your about the author?
You often see the about the author in the back. So very last page here is the about the author. And that's quite common to see that at the very end of the book.
It seems like unless the author is dead, like when you get classics, like they usually put that in the front, right? And then
Yeah. I mean, and you see it sometimes. I have some clients that put that in the front, but the vast majority put it in the back. You can have different kinds of indexes. Oftentimes, with a book like this, so they actually have a recipe index as well as a subject index.
Mhm.
So that's something you often see.
And with photo books, sometimes you actually have a visual index, right?
Mhm.
So you have little thumbnails of the images at the end, which
Yeah.
like I think is kind of cool because sometimes you can't remember the title of the photograph that you're looking for, but to go through those thumbnails,
Right.
it's kind of cool. That's what I'm working on a book right now, and I'm very excited to have an image index in the back.
Cool.
Because it looks professional,
Mhm.
even if the work in it is not. Any other anything else coming in from the internet?
But, okay, let's see. So, what font size is best for a novel or a book of poetry?
We get this question a lot.
Mhm.
People ask me all the time, what font size?
Okay, that's a good question. So, for those of us who are conditioned using Microsoft Word and with Times New Roman 12-point text, double spaced, that usually doesn't apply for book design. I would start more in the realm of between 9 and 10, maybe going up to 11, depending on the font. It's interesting because fonts actually vary quite a bit in size. So, for example, a font like Garamond, which is a fairly common serif font, is quite small. So you might want to consider setting that at, say, 10.5, whereas another font like, say, Minion, which is another common serif font, would be, you could set that at 9 in a book of, say, poetry, and it would look fine, be very readable. So, but when you go up to like 12, it's looking horsey. That's the word we use. It does look. I mean, I don't think there's any way around saying that it just looks amateurish when you see 12-point text in a book. It basically screams like amateur, unless it's like large type, like it's for
Right.
people who are visually challenged and that sort of thing.
Yeah, keep your audience in mind if you're writing
Yeah.
books for seniors. And,
Yeah.
obviously, bump up the
Yep.
text. So this is one book called The Emerging Writer.
Mm-hmm.
This has, what? I'm going to test your knowledge. What font size
Yeah,
is this?
I mean, I would say like 9.5 maybe.
Yeah, and it's good and readable. And we have, fully justified text.
Mm-hmm.
I like to show this book. It's a book for writers, and it's pretty straightforward and pretty serious. But then they've got these great little chapter heads with this kind of line art. And this stuff's pretty much free. Like you can get this kind of thing. And they start everything with a little quote, and they've got a serif font down here,
Mhm.
right? And then and actually even their headers are serif fonts too. I think they kind of want to give it a typewriter feel.
Yeah, and so that's a nice display font that they're using.
And they put in little comics every once in a while. Happen to know in Illustrator you can put in comics, but and this is another one. This is in a slightly larger trim size. We have Cruise of the Gringos Vagabundos by Bud Hedrick. Kind of a cool little book about the guy who, in the 60s, went off sailing with his friends around the Sea of Cortez and got into all kinds of trouble. But, kind of similar sort of thing in terms of font size and justified text. And then Bud did some kind of cool things. He did include some photographs in here. This is not a photo book per se, so he did not choose with our trade books to do like the highest quality printing because the photos are not a central part of it, and it allowed him to keep the cost down. But it did do nicely, for instance, to show maps. So every chapter is headed up by a map, which again gives you visual interest. It also lets people actually that aren't familiar with the area understand what's going on. So we went with font size. So what about sans serif? I mean, serif fonts. I guess we should probably identify what those are first and talk about when you should use each one.
Okay. So serif fonts. Maybe why don't we take a look at that book you just had? Yeah, let's look at this one.
Great.
Okay, so I'm going to zoom right in here, but these little lines that appear at the bottom of the letter strokes, of the vertical strokes, there's these little horizontal lines. Those are called serifs, and most body text uses a serif font, and that's kind of, it's sort of debatable whether a serif font actually is more readable as body text. Some people argue that it's just simply what we're conditioned to see, whereas others say, well, the serifs tend to kind of give this variation of thick and thin within the font, sort of a readable quality to it that's easy on the eye. But regardless, you usually want to use a serif font as your body text, as your primary body text font throughout the book. Sans serif, just looking at this cover, so we have these big serifs here. This is what I call the slab serif fonts earlier, but then this font here is a sans serif font, so we don't see those horizontal lines that are appearing at the bottom of the strokes of the letters. And, you know, there's not really hard and fast rules about when to use serif and when to use sans serif, but in general, let's just say in a book of mostly text, you're going to have your serif font as your body text, and then for your display elements, so your chapter numbers, chapter titles, you could consider using a sans serif font for those. But sans serifs are usually used more in display elements, and they're also used as kind of what we would call like side elements, like say sidebars, where you have a situation where you have your body text, and let me see if I can find one. Okay, so here's what we call a sidebar here. So it's this text that's kind of jutting into your body text block. And this is sans serif, a sans serif font. And in a way, one reason why you're using a sans serif font is you're simply trying to distinguish this text from that text. And that's a good way of doing it. But sans serif fonts, with sidebars like this, oftentimes you might have a sidebar with color, say like dark colored, you might have the text that's reversing out as white. And when you're doing that, actually sans serif fonts tend to be better for that sort of treatment because it's just, you know, they tend to be more readable against dark backgrounds. So, but even this would be considered a display element in a way. It's not your main narrative text here. So that's when you would usually use a sans serif font.
Just a question, actually, as a book designer, like when you get this book, have they already they have things just set out and they say this is what the sidebar, you know, is going to be and all that, and you just follow their instructions?
Yeah. And that's actually an important kind of point is, you know, make sure before you start laying out your book, even though the temptation may be there to just start, you know, putting stuff on the pages, it's good to just have all that stuff figured out up front, so that when you get to the point where you're actually just bringing text onto the page, that all that stuff's already been predetermined. Unless the only exception I would say to that is if you're trying to fill out, like say a page ends, you have like a really short page at the end of your chapter and you're trying to fill out that text, that page, then maybe you could find something to add to that page to fill out that space. But in general, you want to have all that stuff figured out beforehand.
Do we have any other questions that have come in?
No.
I wanted to ask you actually about covers. This is a question that, and I know it's different, obviously, for kind of, in some ways, self-published books and things like that versus like mass market books. Do you choose the cover image? Do they tell you what they want? And when do you work on the cover? Because people are often asking us, like, do I do the cover first? There's that temptation to do the cover first.
Well, I would say that in the traditional publishing world, the cover is often done early. It's often done even before the book has been written. And the reason why really is a business decision is that the publisher wants to start marketing this book as soon as possible. And so I've designed covers where I don't see the book actually published until like a year and a half later. For self-publishing, that's not really, well, it could play a role if you're looking to start marketing your book early. That's a great way to do it because your cover really is your brand, and it's your book's brand, and so that's kind of the main visual thing that is being used to sort of signify what your book is.
It's important to note, like, and this is again strictly from a Blurb perspective, if you're using any of our tools, you always want to design the cover last, and I'll put a caveat on there, but I'll tell you why that's important. The number of pages in your book and the type of paper is going to change your spine width. And when you're designing your cover, you have to keep into account the spine width itself. So if you think it's only a 20-page book, but you know what, you have a lot of photos, so you add it to 40, that's actually going to cause a problem for your design. So I do the wrong thing myself. I pretty much design the cover like, I don't know, not even halfway in. I'm so eager. I do the cover. Sometimes it kind of helps form like the aesthetic for the whole book. So if you do that, just make sure to go back to your cover and make sure that everything is still where it should be, and that you're not going further than you should. For instance, in Blurb Book Write, we now actually have the ability to design across the cover, which we didn't have before. So you can take a photo, you can stretch it all the way across. But if you imagine that you put that cover in for a 20-page book and you've got that image, and then again you double your page size, you're going to need to bring that image out a bit more so that it works. We actually do have a question that I see. People want to know where they can find nice fonts without spending hundreds and thousands of dollars. And I need to know this too because I'm bored with the fonts on my computer, and my book needs a little.
Okay, so there are plenty of free fonts out there. I don't always advise to just go out and use free fonts for your book. Because free fonts, they're free for a reason. Usually, usually it's designers that are kind of they're practicing. Maybe they want to become a font designer someday, and so they're creating these fonts and they're putting them up there as kind of a way to sort of sell their work and giving it away. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a great font. My advice would be that for a body text font, a serif body text font, that you should go buy a quality font. A font with a lot of different formatting options, the italic, the bold, the small caps, ideally the condensed, the extended. Spend a little money on that, and there's good body text fonts that come with software already and come with computers. And then maybe try free fonts for, say, your display text, because then you're not. Usually, where the problems with free fonts is you see it more in body text because the spacing between the characters is not as well flushed out, and so you're reading it and you'll see just these kind of like weird spaces in between characters. And believe it or not, there's just a ton of time that goes into tweaking the relationships between those characters that the font designers spend. It takes years sometimes to build quality fonts. So another thing that people do is a lot of fonts have they license a certain number of users. So for example, I think, don't quote me on this, but I think Adobe allows, say, 8 users per font. So you could team up with, say, 7 other people. I know designers that have done this. And let's go in on this $3,000 Adobe font package, and we'll split the cost 7 ways. And you're doing it legally. You're each using, you're each pitching in that, and you're each a legal user for those fonts. So that's kind of, I get deals, like I see stuff in my emails, mydesigndeals.com or something. If you Google stuff like that, you can find good deals with font. They'll be selling, say, like 50 nice fonts for, say, $30. I'm seeing that more and more often now. And then finally, if you're on Adobe Creative Cloud, you get to use a lot of fonts that are on there for free once you're paying for that. So, And that's actually a really good deal because you get hundreds and hundreds of fonts in there that you don't normally get, say, through your Microsoft Word or whatever. So, yeah.
So for some reason, I was thinking of like door-to-door font salesmen. I think it'd be fun if someone like came around and they had a suitcase and they're wearing a hat and they open it up and they're selling you fonts.
Yeah, well, it used to be that's how you found your fonts, was they'd be in these binders, and you'd open the binder and you'd go through all these pages of fonts displaying, each font printed out on the page, and that's how you would choose your fonts, but it's not so much anymore.
Well, we're about ready to wrap up, so thought we'd give you some tips to hopefully get you started or finished on your book. One, we kind of mentioned this earlier, but print out samples of pages to test the readability. There's different ways you can do that. It's pretty easy to print a page in InDesign. In Blurb Bookright, you can export your book as a PDF. This is not one that you would actually take to a printer to print because the images will be low res, but it's enough for you to print out, to be able to read, and very importantly, to proofread. There are things that, frankly, you'll just won't see until it's actually paper in front of you.
I totally recommend that.
Another thing, go out and look at books that you like. Like go to your bookstore, go to your magazine stand or whatever, and look at the things that make books that you like successful. That's like great artist steal, right?
Yeah, and also when it comes to, I was going to mention this earlier, when it comes to your layout of your pages, is one thing that I learned. One way that I learned to do, nice page layout is I would find some books that I liked, some interiors that I liked. I bought them or I checked them out from the library, and I took tracing paper and I just started kind of measuring the various margins and the amount of space between elements and that sort of thing. It really doesn't take that long to do a few pages. And then you really start to kind of see the sort of symmetry of the page. Obviously, if you're trying to find cover designs that inspire you, it's not that clear cut, but finding covers that you like within the genre that you're operating within and kind of using those as models, there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I think a really cool exercise for people, download Bookright, open up InDesign or something like that. Find a book that you like, and even if you're not going to use this for your final design, actually try to copy that layout as much as possible. Print it out and see how close that is. I think that's a good way to just teach you how all the different things work together. Let's see, we talked about Serif Fonts being the most popular for text, whether that's just something we all believe or it's scientific. Seems to be good advice. And keep it simple. Clean fonts, monochromatic color, lots of white space, right? That seems to be good.
Yeah.
Another thing, don't do it alone. If you have a complex book, hire someone. Blurb has the dream team. You can go there and hire someone. You can bribe your friends, with treats or other things to get them to take another look at your book. But hire an illustrator. Find people to do the things that you can't do very well. So I think that brings us to the end matter, as they say.
Nice.
Always got to bring it around.
Very good.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Thank you so much, Howie, for coming
You're
in.
welcome.
And hope we got you away from InDesign.
Yeah, it's actually, I'm looking at a person, which is nice.
Excellent. And thank you guys for joining in, and we'll be back here in another month talking about something else. And if there's a thing that you actually want to know about, let us know in the comments, and we'll see how we can fit it into the schedule. All right. Bye.